What if the person you call you is not a fixed thing, but a process? What if the voice in your head is not the owner of your mind, but only one part of it? And what if the self you defend, improve, judge, and suffer for is not fake exactly, but constructed? That sounds like philosophy, but it is also neuroscience. Because when science looks inside the brain for the self, it does not find a single command center. It does not find a little observer hidden somewhere behind the eyes, watching reality like a private audience inside the skull. It finds systems, networks, predictions, memories, body maps, emotions, attention, narrative assembly. And yet, out of all that activity, one powerful feeling appears: I am me. That feeling is so familiar that most people never question it. But maybe that is exactly why it matters. Because if the self feels obvious, stable, and continuous, while the brain underneath is distributed, dynamic, and constantly updating, then the self may be less like a thing you are and more like something your brain is doing. To understand that, we need to start with one uncomfortable fact. Neuroscience has never found a single place in the brain where the whole self lives. Instead, different aspects of selfhood seem to come from different processes working together. Your body ownership depends on sensory integration. Your personal identity depends heavily on memory. Your sense of agency depends on how the brain models action. Your social self depends on how you imagine other minds seeing you. Your inner story depends on language, memory, and interpretation. What feels like one solid being may actually be a coordinated construction. One major clue comes from what researchers call the default mode network. This is a set of brain regions that becomes especially active when the mind turns inward, when you remember your past, imagine your future, reflect on yourself, or mentally rehearse your place in the world. That alone is revealing. The self does not seem to emerge from a single point. It emerges from a pattern, from coordination, from ongoing internal modeling. Then there is the famous rubber hand illusion. In this experiment, a person's real hand is hidden from view, while a fake hand is placed in front of them. Both the hidden real hand and the visible fake hand are stroked at the same time. After a while, many people begin to feel that the fake hand belongs to them. Think about that. Your sense of what is your body can be manipulated by synchronizing vision and touch. That means body ownership is not a direct reading of reality. It is a model. A useful model, yes, but still a model. And then come the split brain studies. In some patients with severe epilepsy, the connection between the brain's hemispheres was surgically cut to reduce seizures. These cases produced some of the strangest findings in neuroscience. Information could reach one hemisphere without the other fully knowing it. And in some situations, the speaking side of the brain would still create an explanation for behavior, even when it did not truly know the cause. It would generate a story, a coherent story, because the brain appears to value coherence so strongly that it sometimes constructs meaning after the fact. That idea should make you pause, because it suggests that part of what you call me may not be a pure observer of truth. It may be an interpreter, a narrator, a system that organizes experience into a story that feels unified enough to live by. So here's the core idea. The self may not be a thing hidden inside the brain. It may be the brain's best ongoing model of the organism, a model that helps you move, remember, decide, predict, relate, and survive. Let's break that into 5 parts. First, the self may be an interface. When you use a computer, you do not see raw electrical activity, binary code, or machine-level processes. You see icons, windows, folders, and buttons. That interface is not the full truth of the machine. It is a simplified layer that makes interaction possible. Your conscious self may work the same way. You do not experience neurons firing, hormones shifting, or unconscious processes competing for control. You experience something much cleaner. I want this, I regret that, I chose, I am afraid, I am thinking. That may not be the full machinery of the mind. It may be the user-friendly version. Not false in a useless sense, false in the same way a map is false, simplified, selective, practical. Second, the self may be a continuity engine. Why do you feel like the same person across time? Partly because memory ties your life together. Memory creates narrative continuity. It links past events to present identity. It lets you say, that child was me, even though your body, thoughts, priorities, and worldview may have changed dramatically. But memory is not a perfect recording device. It is reconstructive. Every time you remember your past, you are not simply replaying a file. You are rebuilding a scene, reassembling meaning, updating identity. So the feeling of being one continuous self may depend less on finding some eternal inner core and more on the brain's ability to keep rewriting a story that feels coherent enough to preserve. Third, the self may be a prediction. The brain is not passive. It does not just wait for reality to arrive. It constantly predicts what it is about to see, hear, feel, and do. It predicts the environment. It predicts the body. It predicts the likely meaning of signals before those signals are fully processed. And part of what it predicts may be you. Where do you end and the world begin? Which sensations belong to your body? Which thought enters awareness? Which action feels intentional? These are not always direct facts. They are interpreted through models. That helps explain why body ownership can be distorted, why people can feel detached from themselves, why agency can sometimes feel strange or delayed, and why certain altered states can weaken the normal boundaries of selfhood. Fourth, the self may be a filter. At every moment, the brain receives far more information than conscious awareness can hold. So it compresses, it selects, it ranks, it organizes. And one of the most efficient ways to organize experience is around a center of relevance. Me, my pain, my fear, my plan, my future. This is incredibly useful, but it can also create the impression that there is a single solid entity inside the system owning everything equally and completely. Some famous experiments on action complicated that picture. In studies on voluntary movement, measurable brain activity related to action sometimes appeared before people reported the conscious intention to move. These findings are often exaggerated, but they do raise an important possibility. Conscious awareness may not always initiate action first. Sometimes it may register, interpret, and explain what the brain has already begun. In that sense, consciousness may be less like a king giving orders and more like a spokesperson stepping forward once the process is already underway. Fifth, the self may be useful precisely because it is simplified. And this is where the whole idea becomes practical. If the self is constructed, that does not mean it is meaningless. It means it is functional. A simplified self-model helps an organism survive. It helps you plan. It helps you remember promises. It helps you navigate social life. It helps you maintain goals, responsibilities, attachments, and identity across time. It helps you become someone in the eyes of others and in your own. A map is not reality, but without a map, navigation becomes impossible. The self may be like that, not a perfect mirror of what you are, but a tool that helps you move through complexity. So what follows if this is true? First, identity may be more flexible than it feels. Not infinitely flexible. Biology, habits, trauma, temperament, and memory all matter, but the self may be less rigid than your inner voice suggests. Second, inner conflict becomes easier to understand. If the mind is made of multiple interacting processes, then contradiction is not a defect. It is natural. Part of you wants comfort, part of you wants growth, part of you wants truth, part of you wants escape. The feeling of unity may come after the negotiation, not before it. Third, suffering may become easier to work with. Not because pain becomes unreal, but because thoughts and emotions do not automatically have to define the whole self. If the self is a dynamic model, then not every passing mental state deserves total identification. Fourth, memory becomes more fragile and more humbling. Your past matters deeply, but the version of it you carry is partly reconstructed each time you revisit it. That should make us more careful with certainty and maybe more compassionate with ourselves and others. Fifth, and most practically, the self can be trained through therapy, through meditation, through disciplined attention, through habit formation, through reflective writing, through the repeated stories you tell yourself. If the self is something the brain keeps building, then what you repeat matters, what you rehearse matters, what you identify with matters. So maybe the real question is not simply, who am I? Maybe the deeper question is, what kind of self is my brain constructing? And can that construction change? That is where this becomes personally important. Because once you understand that the self may be built, stabilized, edited, and sometimes distorted, you can no longer treat every internal narrative as sacred truth. Some of what feels permanent may be repetition. Some of what feels like identity may be habit. Some of what feels like essence may simply be a model that has been reinforced for a very long time. And that does not make your life less meaningful. It may actually make change more possible. So no, the self is probably not an illusion in the cheap sense. It is not nothing. It is not empty. It is not fake like a lie. It may be something more interesting than that. An interface, a body model, a continuity engine, a predictive tool, a filter for relevance, a useful illusion. And maybe that is the real revelation. The self feels solid. Neuroscience suggests it is dynamic. The self feels singular. Neuroscience suggests it is assembled. The self feels permanent. Neuroscience suggests it is continuously maintained. So perhaps you are not a fixed thing trapped inside your brain. Perhaps you are the process your brain keeps producing to navigate reality. Lucid order. Question everything.